So hills are fine and dandy. They make your table not look completely flat. But one of the complaints that I see in a lot of systems are, well, you know, my army gets shot off the board because there's nothing in the way. Well, if you got a board that's completely flat, what you want to do is add some stuff in the middle of it, man. Look at that. Look at that line of sight blocking. Look, oh, look at that. Yeah, good luck shooting my guys when I got them lined up right behind these things right here. So why not? Why not? Let's make some of those real quick. So I've had a couple people and friends ask me how I make terrain, be it something as simple as a hill or as complex as like a little pillar. These are, of course, unpainted, so those are steps we'll get to later. But what I do really isn't all that difficult, so I'll kind of guide you through what I use. So what we're going to really need to make sure we have is our tools. I recommend a pen for doing your outlines, a nice sharp box cutter or razor, because this is going to make sure you get initially clean lines. One of the things I really would recommend is one of these. It's a floral color. This actually is battery operated, uses 2D batteries, basically sends a nice little, charges up this wire, and this just kind of cuts through the foam. You do have to make sure you replace that and keep good batteries in it. Has a little on and off switch. They're a little expensive, but definitely worth it if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff. And then glue. You may be tempted to use this Gorilla Glue. I don't recommend it. It expands a bit and will leave gaps even if you weight down your stuff as much as possible. Elmer's is a cheap, probably your cheapest one to go with, and it does work. Just has a little bit extra drying time. I recommend this right here, this tacky glue. It's a little bit more expensive. It's used for doing fabrics mainly, but it's an all-purpose adhesive. Really good short dry time. I recommend Elmer's and the tacky glue the most, also because your floral color will go through them. It'll be a little bit of resistance, but it actually will go through them, as opposed to the Gorilla Glue. In addition to the expanding, it will kind of eat through your cutter. Don't use contact cement for the material, because it will eat through it. And of course, we have the material. This is pink construction insulation foam. It's nigh impossible to get into frame because the piece that I have right now is a 2x4, 2 feet by 4 feet. They come in 10 feet by 4 feet panels. They'll run you between 15 to 20 bucks, but you're gonna get a lot of stuff out of it. They come in 1/2 inch thickness. I wouldn't, some places will have 2 by 2, 1 inch thick panels. I don't recommend them. They tend to run about 10 bucks a pop. So if you need something with that much height, I recommend just buying these, gluing them together like I'm going to show you. A little bit of pressure, you'll be fine. I do recommend using a cutting board, regardless of the surface. I'm actually doing this on my coffee table in my living room. So either use a mat, or if you want to double up on some cardboard like I have right now, like I'm using this box, you can see there's a gash right here that I went through. You won't go through both layers as long as you're gentle. So let's kind of take something basic. So I've already cut off a piece of this foam board. You can see the top edge and the bottom edge. This stuff with a good knife is super easy to cut through. So let's make something basic. So what you want to do, generally you'd make your line, but we need a smaller piece because we're going to start with the hill. Score it, it snaps. Pretty much simple as cake. Take that other piece, put it away. I do recommend drawing your design on the unfinished side, just because when you do your base coats and paint, it'll be a little bit easier. So we want to make a hill. So our most common hill here is your little lima bean shape kidney. So use your pen, draw an outline. This pen doesn't work, but the good thing is it doesn't need to work because of what it's doing. And this is where I said your floral cutter comes in handy. So I'm going to try to do this on frame. I might not be able to, but turn it on, give it a couple seconds. It'll heat up pretty quickly. This wire, I've been using it, so it's a little dirty. Cleaner wire will work better. Newer batteries also work better. But I'll give you an example right now of how easily this cuts through foam. Batteries are kind of dying on this guy, so try to resist using a saw motion, because if you do, while it still works, that's how you get this jagged edge like that. You don't want that unless this is kind of what you're going for, but this is good for textured. If you want a nice smooth hill, I don't recommend it. So let me get this cut real quick and I will come back. Alright, so I got my basic hill cut out, and I did two different ways. This right here is what happens when you use like a sawing motion with your floral cutter and you go up and down. It gives you that texture, which you may want, you may not want, but if you make a straight line, kind of be patient with it, you get this real smooth edge. One of the things I will say is, as you're cutting, you need to make sure it's real smooth. If you hear a ping at the end of your cut, you may want to check your wire to make sure it's clean, or the batteries on your cutter. And that ping that I'm talking about is this. It's a little bit louder on the other ones, but that means that you're either putting too much pressure, or you're forcing it too much, or your battery's power are running low. So once you have your basic shape, you can be done with it, or you can finish it a bit more. I'm going to kind of go back over and give this smoother edge a more gradual transition, so it's more of a ramp than a plateau, using this same cutter. And really that's easy to do. You just take a piece, kind of, it's weird to do on camera, but you find your angle. See if I can just, you just find your angle that you want. You go in. So if you're making hills and whatnot, you may want to make them a little bit bigger, because you're going to lose a big piece. And I'll stop right here so you can show. And there it is. There's a smooth transition. You want more of an angle for your gaming stuff, because that's a little bit awkward, but it works when you do it right. The other thing I would recommend, when you have your big pieces and you have squares like this, keep these, and I'll show you why. So there you go. I've angled out the sides, a little bit more organic. I recommend just slapping a base coat of some super inexpensive craft glue on top. Make sure you get a good coat, and then you can hit it with a spray can or rattle can if you want. I do recommend putting a base coat on it. If you rattle can at a distance, it's not going to eat away, but more likely than not it is. If you want a little bit more of a dynamic feel, you can cut out little smaller hills and kind of drop those there. You can glue them on before. That's why I said keep these scrap pieces. You never know what you're going to do with them. And yeah, you need to glue them on or keep them modular. As long as you keep the layers smaller, of course, you can stack them as high as you want. I like keeping them modular because it gives you more variety. But if you want just huge pieces, like for example this bad boy, that is a good example. That's a good, nice plateau. Thing's about 1 foot. You can see here these gaps. That's why I don't recommend using that Gorilla Glue, because while it's going to give me a seal that's going to hold forever, it was a pain in the ass to cut through. And it kind of leaves this weird finish. It's going to need to be sanded a bit. And I hate sanding foam for many reasons. But in addition, you'll need to fill that as well. And I'm not a big fan of having to do extra work. I like my stuff simple. So once again, we're back to our handy dandy foam. This is going to be really simple. Actually, you know what? I want to use some of these guys right here. So we're going to take our scraps before we cut into the good stuff, and let's find some good squares. Squares are always good. Why am I trying to do that? I said right tools for the job. So squares are always good. They make for nice flat tops. I will say this. Making terrain out of foam is super easy, but at the end of the day, it's really wasteful. You lose a lot of it. There's not really much you can do with the pieces. Moving that you don't use other than throwing them away. But, you know, it's inexpensive, and we're hobbyists. we like to waste our money on much dumber things like plastic, toy men. And if you're anything like me, they'll never see a tabletop because I'm a terrible person or a terrible gamer. So we got these. These will do. This is why you want to cut all the way through because they should snap easy, but sometimes they don't. And these are going to be for my, let's clean this up just a little bit, tops. Because I'll show you what we're going to do. So let's get all this junk out of the way. Let's move these useful pieces. We go to this big guy, and we're going to break this down into various rectangles or squares. Squares if you want your bases to be more circular, rectangles not. If we took geometry, we can find very effective ways to break this down. These are just basic lines to get my guide out. If you want big pillars, you can use big ones. If you want smaller ones, you can do that also. So just kind of make some basic guidelines, eyeball it, and we'll get those cut down. I'll save you the trouble. I broke down that piece into probably a bunch of squares and rectangles. I will say this, rectangles will give you nice hills like this when you're done with them, but they do look a bit awkward. Squares are going to give you more of a organic circular shape. So yeah, I could have marked them out. I could have planned what I wanted, but you know what? If I did that, that wouldn't be any fun, especially since, let's be honest, the next part's going to take you a bit of time, and it's going to be a bit annoying. So what you want to do is find shapes. Let's use the squares. Go from largest to smallest. Kind of stack them, kind of glue them, because you're going to want to start out with a rough shape like this. Try to avoid angling them. Get them just glued on top of each other. You want kind of a staggered effect. You're going to trim this down, but we want to start with as rough a shape as possible. Kind of think. Just kind of imagine, because the glue up, you're going to have plenty of time to think of this as you do the glue up. So start small, you can stack those on top of each other. And this is where I said that this stuff comes in handy. So let's see if we can't get some of this together. And the other advantage to working big to small is you don't really need a lot, but you will need some decent coverage. Oh, this bottle's almost out. I think between that and my floral cutter battery, I need to make a trip to Walmart or oof. I'm just gonna do one because this is not quality television. There we go. So you want to take a little bit. Doesn't take a lot. If you want to spread it, you can, because we're going to be trimming a lot of this away, so you don't want to basically trim it to the point where you don't have any. Kind of spread it. Find your next piece and just put them together. They don't really take much pressure, and unlike they don't take much pressure. It doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, yeah, you're going to want to give it like 2 or 3 hours. This is the most boring part. But once you get them together, you just kind of do your next layer until you kind of get that height that you want. I will try to do 3. I said I will try to do 3. Oh, this bottle might be completely out. That might be a problem. Oh, it's not going to be worth the effort. So we're going to go to old reliable. The cow. Elmer's is our friend. So same thing. Doesn't take a lot. Give it a good layer. Spread it out nice and smooth. Doesn't need, it's glue. We all worked with this in elementary school. It gets fun. You get to rub it off later. Put it down. You stack them. This might have been the wrong piece, but it was. There it is. See, that's why you plan. I don't plan. I live organically. Just kind of get it out. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna let your glue seep out. It's Elmer's. It's like $1 a bottle. It's not that big of a deal. I think we'll just do these right now since we got them. Let's do this. It doesn't really matter which side that goes on. So we're just gonna stack up some shapes, and I'll stack up some shapes and come right back. Through movie and TV magic, we are back. So these guys have been drying for about, I let them go overnight, and I'll be completely honest with you, I let them go for about a week. I kind of forgot I was in the middle of this, but doesn't matter. So we have our basic tower shapes, and now we got to make them into pillars. So here's what we do. Take our floor cutter, make sure it's on, make sure it's actually working. It's hot. We tested it with our finger like you do. And all you're going to do is start coming down here and giving it a little cut. This is why I like using the Elmer's, because it gives you a good adhesive layer, but it still is easy for the floral cutter to go through. I use a sawing action. You can go straight down if you got a good battery and a good wire. This guy's at the end of his rope. I'm gonna need to replace it. But we do that. So we cut away. You take that off, and that's what happens. You get that little shape. So let's go through and let's make some cuts. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, you can go in and round off these corners if you want, make them a little bit more smooth. You can even take a piece of sandpaper to it and just sand it out. I'm probably going to leave this really rough because that's the texture I want for the terrain that I'm doing. So as you can see, it's not really, it's pretty simple. You take stuff, you stack them up, you glue them together, you do your thing, you do some cutting, and you get shapes. The more complex you do, you can make them as big as you want. This guy kind of came out a little bit weird. It's kind of got a bigger base. It's hard to see. As small as you want, as complex. Simple. Variety is the spice of life. So the more you have on your board, the better it'll look, especially when they're all painted in together. That same basic concept can be used to do plateaus. Get that out. Plateaus and little mesas like this big guy that I really don't like, but you can see the gaps from using the Gorilla Glue. I'm gonna have to fill that. If you have little gaps, you can use basic caulk. You can get it in your home center. Just kind of fill it in there. It doesn't take a lot. But other than that, it's a really simple process, simple technique. I'll try to get a little video on a basic painting on how to get these painted up in tabletop quality. Like I said, it doesn't take long even then. So I really hope that this kind of helped anybody who maybe was on the fence about making their own terrain, and this doesn't even need to be for a tabletop game. You could use it for your D&D sessions, anything along those lines, anything where you want to have some kind of visual representation of where you are. The key is use your imagination. Don't be afraid. You get a lot of material to work with for not a large price, so there's no reason, in my opinion, you shouldn't get a little bit crafty with it. Once again, I hope it helps, and have a good one.